The classroom felt different that afternoon, like the air itself was holding its breath. Everyone had rushed out the moment the bell rang, their laughter fading down the hallway until only silence was left behind. I thought I would be the last one to pack up, but when I looked up, I realized I wasn't alone. Marcel was still sitting there. He wasn't doing anything in particular. No books open, no papers spread out, no earbuds in. Just sitting at his desk, head lowered, like he was lost in a place far deeper than the room we were in. I hesitated with my bag half-zipped, unsure whether to leave or say something. We'd shared classes for months, exchanged a few polite nods here and there, but never anything meaningful. Still, something about the way he sat there made it impossible to walk out. "Hey, you good?" I asked finally, my voice softer than I intended. He looked up slowly, as if surfacing from deep water. For a moment, I wasn't even sure he'd heard me. But then the corner of his mouth lifted, just barely, and it felt like permission to stay. "Yeah," he murmured, "just thinking." There was a heaviness to those two words, a weight that didn't belong to homework or exams. I'd never heard him speak like that, not around other students, not even around teachers. Marcel was the kind of guy who blended into the background, the type who noticed everything but said nothing. Quiet, composed, unreadable. But right now, he looked anything but composed. I slid my bag off my shoulder and sat back down at my desk. I didn't want to pry, but something inside me, curiosity, concern, maybe both, made me stay. "You sure?" I asked again, leaning forward slightly. "You look like something's on your mind." He hesitated. I watched his fingers tap lightly against the edge of his desk, his eyes flickering toward the window, where the late afternoon sun spilled across the floor in warm gold. "It's nothing," he said, but the way he said it told me it was definitely something. I didn't push, not at first. The last thing he needed was someone demanding answers he wasn't ready to give. So I waited. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the careful kind, the kind that gives someone room to breathe. After a moment, he drew a slow breath. "I guess I just don't know where I'm going anymore," he said quietly. Something inside me softened. "With school," he shook his head. "With everything." His voice cracked just a little on the last word, and suddenly the quiet guy in the back of the room wasn't a mystery anymore. He was human, deeply, painfully human. "Everyone seems to have their life mapped out," he continued, "like they know exactly who they're supposed to be. And I'm just stuck." I swallowed, feeling the words hit closer to my own truth than I expected. "You're not the only one who feels that way," I said softly. "It just looks like everyone else has it figured out." He finally met my eyes, and there was something vulnerable there, honest and raw. "It's like the world is moving forward," he whispered, "and I'm standing still." The room grew quieter, as if even the air was listening. The fading sunlight stretched long across the floor, wrapping the space in warm stillness. It felt like we were suspended in some fragile moment that wasn't supposed to happen, but did. "I don't think anyone has it figured out," I said. "We're all just pretending we do." Marcel let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but not quite. "You really think so?" "I know so." For the first time since I walked over, he gave me a real smile. Small, tired, but real. "I've always been scared of that," he said, "not knowing what comes next." His honesty hit hard, not because it surprised me, but because it mirrored my own fears in a way I hadn't admitted out loud. It was strange how someone you barely knew could suddenly feel like the only person who understood you. "I think we're all afraid," I said quietly. "But maybe that's where we start growing." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, and for a moment I didn't feel like the girl who blended into the crowd or kept her thoughts tucked neatly away. I felt understood. We sat there together, two people who didn't have the answers, who didn't know what the next step would be, but somehow that felt okay. When I finally stood up to leave, Marcel looked lighter, just a little, but enough to make me pause. "Selena," he said softly. "Yeah." "Thanks for staying." I smiled, warmth blooming somewhere deep inside. "Anytime." As I walked out of the room, I could feel it, the shift, the small, unexpected change that happens when someone lets you in, even just a little. I didn't know what it meant yet, or what would come next, but something had begun, and I had a feeling it wouldn't end here. The next few days moved quietly, but not in a way I expected. Nothing dramatic changed between Marcel and me. We didn't suddenly become inseparable or start sharing every detail of our lives. It wasn't like that. Instead, something softer settled into place, an unspoken understanding that lingered in the spaces between our conversations, and even in the silence. We still sat in our usual places in class. He remained by the window, half lost in his thoughts, and I stayed a few seats forward, pretending to be more focused on lectures than I really was. But now, when our eyes met, even for a second, something passed between us, something gentle, familiar, almost like a secret only we knew. And maybe that's what scared me the most, because the moment something unspoken exists between two people, it becomes impossible to ignore. One afternoon, a week after that first conversation, the classroom was unusually empty again. Students rushed out to beat the gaury rain that had been threatening all day. I lingered behind, packing slowly, telling myself I needed extra time to finish an assignment. But really, I was waiting, or hoping, I'm not sure which. But when I looked toward the back of the room and saw his desk empty, a surprising flutter of disappointment hit me. Maybe he really had left. I slid my notebook into my bag and stood to leave, reminding myself that it wasn't a big deal. But just as I stepped toward the door, a quiet voice behind me made me stop. "Celine." I turned sharply. Marcel stood near the back wall, hands in his jacket pockets, like he'd been waiting for the room to empty before approaching me. The look in his eyes wasn't unreadable this time. It was unsure, soft, like he was asking for something he didn't know how to put into words. "Hey," I said, trying for casual, but my voice betrayed a hint of warmth. Warmth I didn't bother hiding. He stepped closer. "Can we talk?" There it was again, that pull, that quiet tension that felt too heavy to ignore. I nodded and moved to the desk by the window. The rain outside had just started, tapping softly against the glass. Marcel followed and sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, slow and delicate. Then he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking about what you said," he murmured. "That day, about not needing everything figured out." I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded. "It made sense," he continued, "but I don't think I really understood it until recently." He paused, staring at his hands like the words were written across his palms, and he wasn't sure how to read them. "I thought I had my life planned out," he said finally. "Like if I just stuck to the script, everything would make sense. But lately, Everything feels wrong, off. The rain grew steadier outside, soft enough not to distract, but loud enough to fill the silence. I leaned forward slightly. Off how? He hesitated, then looked at me in a way that felt almost too honest. Like I'm pretending, he said. Pretending to have it together. Pretending to know where I'm going. Pretending I'm not lost. The vulnerability in his voice made me sit a little straighter. I had never seen him like this. Never seen anyone like this, actually. Most people wore masks, carefully crafted and polished. But Marcel was letting his crack right in front of me. "What are you afraid will happen if you stop pretending?" I asked gently. He lifted his eyes, meeting mine with a fragile kind of courage. "That I'll fall apart," he whispered, "and won't be able to put myself back together." Something in my chest tightened, an ache I didn't know how to soften. Without meaning to, I lowered my voice. "Marcel, you don't have to hold everything alone. You don't." A slow breath escaped him, and for a moment, he looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step back or leap. "I'm trying," he said softly, "but it's hard." "I know," I whispered. "Everyone pretends, but no one has it figured out. Not really." Marcel let out a shaky laugh, barely there, but enough to lift the heaviness around us. "I guess you're right," he said. "Maybe I don't need all the answers. Maybe. I just need to stop running from the questions." His honesty, his softness, felt like a bridge forming between us. A bridge I wasn't ready to walk away from. For a while, neither of us spoke. The room felt suspended in the warm glow of the fading light and the steady rhythm of the rain. When he finally stood, the slightest hint of calm had returned to his expression. "Thanks for listening," he said quietly. "Always," I replied. The bell rang down the hall, jolting us both back to reality. We stood there, facing each other in the soft afternoon dim, sharing a moment neither of us fully understood yet, but both felt. As he opened the door to leave, he paused. "Celine?" "Yeah." His eyes softened. "I'm glad you didn't walk out that day." And just like that, something shifted again. Small, subtle, but unmistakably real. As the door closed behind him, I couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. Something was unfolding between us, slow and fragile, like a story that wasn't ready to reveal its ending. Not yet, but soon. The days that followed carried a strange sense of ease, like something heavy had lifted just a little, or maybe like I was finally seeing the world through clearer glass. Nothing dramatic happened between Marcel and me. No confession, no sudden closeness, no defining moment that changed everything overnight, but something had shifted, quietly, softly, in a way only the two of us could feel. We didn't talk about those conversations we'd shared, not directly, not in a way that might break the fragile thread forming between us. Instead, it showed up in smaller things. The way he glanced over when he walked into class. The almost invisible smile he'd give me when he caught my eye. The gentle nod when we passed in the hallway. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was something. And sometimes the softest things are the ones that mean the most. One afternoon, after a lecture I barely absorbed, I found myself sitting alone on the steps outside the school. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. I wasn't in any rush to get home, and the thought of sitting in my room with nothing but my own thoughts felt heavier than usual. So I stayed. Let the breeze brush against my skin. Let the day settle around me. I was scrolling absently through my phone when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, familiar ones. Without looking up, I already knew who it was. "Mind if I join you?" Marcel's voice was soft, almost careful. I looked up and smiled, shifting slightly to give him space. "Not at all. Didn't expect to see you out here." He shrugged and sat beside me. "Didn't expect to find you here either." There was something about him that felt different now, not lighter exactly, but more open, like he wasn't trying so hard to hide the things weighing on him. For a moment, we just sat there, letting the quiet settle. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "I've been thinking about everything we talked about, the not knowing, the uncertainty." I glanced over at him, waiting. He continued, "It's strange. I used to think if I had a plan, if I followed it perfectly, everything would fall into place. But now—" He breathed out slowly. "Now I'm realizing maybe it's okay not to know." His words washed over me like something I didn't know I needed. I was so used to holding myself together, pretending I wasn't scared of the future, pretending I wasn't lost, too. "I think you're right," I said quietly. "Maybe figuring things out isn't supposed to be easy. Maybe it's supposed to feel messy." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've been so afraid of messing up," he admitted. "Like if I take a wrong step, everything will fall apart." "And if it does?" I asked gently. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw vulnerability without hesitation. Open, honest, unshielded. "Then I guess I'll have to learn how to put it back together." There was something about that moment, about him saying those words, that made my chest feel warm, tight, alive. It was the kind of growth you don't usually get to witness in real time, the kind people spend years hiding. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just stayed there with him, letting the moment breathe. "You know," I said eventually, "sometimes not knowing can be freeing. Scary, yes, but freeing." He let out a small laugh, softer than I'd ever heard from him. "You're better at this than I am." "I'm not," I said honestly. "I'm figuring it out too." A comfortable silence followed, one that didn't demand explanations or answers. It just existed, steady and warm. After a while, Marcel shifted, pulling his jacket a little tighter against the breeze. "It's strange," he said softly, "how you can go through months of knowing someone without really knowing them at all." And then suddenly, he paused, eyes meeting mine with a softness I wasn't prepared for. "You see them, really see them." My breath caught, just slightly, just enough for him not to notice. "I know what you mean," I whispered. "Some people, you don't expect them to become important, and then one day they just are." He stared at me for a moment, really stared, as if my words held something he'd been trying to understand for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. "Yeah," he murmured, "exactly." The sun dipped further, shadows, stretching long across the steps. Students drifted by, talking, laughing, living in their own bubbles of certainty or confusion. But Marcel and I stayed there, breathing in the same quiet air, sharing something neither of us dared to name yet. Finally, he stood, brushing off his hands. "I should get going," he said softly, "but I'm glad we talked." "Me too," I replied, standing as well. He hesitated, just a second, just long enough for the world to feel still. "Celine," he said, voice low. "Yeah?" His eyes held something gentle, something warm, something new. "Thanks for not letting me feel alone." My heart tightened, softer this time, steadier. "You never were." He gave me a small smile, real, warm, unguarded, and then he walked away, hands in his pockets, shoulders a little lighter than before. As I watched him leave, I felt it again, the shift, subtle, slow, but unmistakably there. Something was growing between us, and somehow I knew it wasn't stopping anytime soon. The final week of school always felt unreal, like someone pressed fast forward on life while you were still trying to catch your breath. Between finals, packing, last-minute assignments, and half-hearted goodbyes to classmates I barely knew, everything blurred together. But even in that chaos, there was one thing I found myself looking forward to more than anything. Those quiet moments with Marcel. They weren't planned. They weren't dramatic. They didn't happen every day. But when they did, they felt like the only part of life not spinning out of control. It was strange how something so small, a conversation, a shared silence, a glance, could become the anchor you didn't realize you needed. We still didn't talk about that first moment in the classroom, or the one after, and yet everything between us felt different now, softer, steadier, like we were learning each other in the spaces between words. But that week, something else was in the air too. A tension I couldn't name, something waiting to unfold. The morning of graduation felt like stepping into a movie scene. The sky was bright and crisp, the kind of blue that made everything feel like a beginning and an ending at once. Families crowded the courtyard, programs rustling, cameras clicking, voices buzzing with excitement. I stood with a few friends in my cap and gown, pretending to laugh along at their jokes. But my mind wasn't there. It was searching the crowd, lingering on faces, waiting for one in particular. And then I saw him. Marcel was standing near a row of old benches, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, staring out at the courtyard like he wasn't quite part of it. His posture was relaxed, but there was something heavy in his eyes, something he hadn't said yet. Without thinking, I excused myself and walked toward him. He looked up just as I reached him, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it softened into something warmer. "Hey," I said quietly, "you okay?" He gave a tiny smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm good." But he wasn't, and I could see it. We stood there for a moment, letting the noise of the crowd fade into the background. "This feels strange," I murmured. "Graduation, like we've been waiting for this forever, and now that it's here, I don't know, I feel empty." Marcel laughed softly, barely there, tinged with something deeper. "Yeah," he said, "I get that. You imagine this day to be huge, life-changing, but standing here, it feels like just another step into something we don't understand." His words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, shifting my weight. "You ever wonder if we're ready for all of this?" he asked suddenly, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. "Adulthood, responsibility, the next chapter." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "All the time," I admitted. He turned toward me, and in that moment, everything around us blurred out. His gaze wasn't guarded now. It wasn't distant. It was searching, really searching, as if trying to read something I hadn't said yet. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would," he said softly. "I thought stepping into the future would feel clear, like I'd know what I was doing. But now—" He shook his head slightly. "Now it just feels like standing on the edge of something I can't see." I felt the tension between us, gentle, tight, almost electric. Not romantic in a loud way, not dramatic, but quiet, deep, real. "I don't think anyone's ready," I said. I think we just pretend we are. We take one step, then another, even if we're unsure. Marcel looked at me for a long moment, eyes softening, a breath catching in his chest. "I'm glad we talked these past weeks," he said, voice almost a whisper. "I know I haven't made it easy sometimes." "You don't have to be easy," I said, smiling softly. "None of us are." His lips curved, not into a forced smile, but a real one, the kind that hinted at relief, acceptance, maybe something more. "You know," I added, "some people walk into your life quietly. No warning, no introduction, and then they become important." Marcel's expression shifted, something tender flickering in his eyes. "Yeah," he murmured, "some people do." The crowd around us began moving toward the ceremony, but neither of us moved yet. It felt like the world was giving us this one moment, suspended, weightless, untouched by everything waiting ahead. "Are you ready?" I asked gently. He held my gaze, steady and warm. "I think," he whispered, "I'm getting there." Something stirred inside me, quiet, warm, undeniable. And just as the announcer's voice echoed across the courtyard, calling us forward, Marcel stepped closer. Not enough to touch, not enough to cross lines. Neither of us were brave enough to name, but close enough for me to feel the shift. Close enough for me to know this was no longer just coincidence or timing or chance. Something was beginning, something neither of us could ignore. We fell into step with the rest of the class, walking toward the next chapter of our lives. The air felt different, alive, charged with something unspoken. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. Not even close. Graduation moved like a dream. Bright lights, proud families, shaky smiles, the rustle of gowns brushing against each other. Names were called one after another, hands were shaken, and cameras captured moments we'd all forget too quickly. Through it all, I kept catching glimpses of Marcel, not on purpose, not consciously, but like my eyes knew where to find him, and every time they did, he wasn't looking away anymore. After the ceremony, the courtyard turned into a storm of hugs, phones, and people calling each other's names. I wandered through the chaos, clutching my program, feeling oddly detached from the celebration. Then I saw him again. Marcel stood by the fountain, near the edge of campus, away from the crowd. He'd taken off his graduation cap, holding it loosely in one hand, while staring down at the rippling water as if trying to read something in its surface. Without thinking, I made my way toward him. He looked up the moment I approached, almost like he'd been waiting. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he replied, but this time the word carried something warm, something deeper than casual greetings. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distant noise of laughter and celebration filled the air behind us, but here it felt different, softer, almost quiet. "How do you feel?" I asked. He let out a slow, thoughtful breath. "Like I just turned the page of a book I'm not finished understanding." I smiled. "That's actually relatable." He returned the smile, but there was something else in his eyes, something heavier, more contemplative. "You know," he said quietly, "I kept thinking about everything we talked about these past few weeks, about uncertainty, fear, all the things I thought I had to hide." I stayed quiet, letting him speak, and I realized. He paused, searching for the words. I wasn't just scared of the future, I was scared of letting people see me, really see me. His voice softened. "Scared of letting you see me." My breath stilled for a moment, not because of shock, but because it felt like something long awaited had finally found its voice. "Marcel," I whispered, unsure where to place the emotion gathering in my chest. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to say anything. I needed to be honest with you, for once." The vulnerability in his tone struck something deep inside me. For weeks, he'd opened pieces of himself slowly, carefully, as if afraid they'd crumble once exposed. But now, he wasn't hiding. I stepped a little closer, the breeze brushing my gown against his. "You don't have to pretend with me. Not then, not now, not ever." He exhaled, quiet, shaky, relieved. The courtyard lights flickered on as the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the stone path. The moment stretched between us, fragile and warm. "What happens now?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "We don't need to know yet." His eyes searched mine, and I realized he wasn't asking about life or careers or futures. He was asking about us. About the thing neither of us had named, but had been growing quietly between every conversation, every silence, every shared moment. "We just take it one day at a time," I said gently. "The same way we've been doing." Marcel nodded slowly, as if letting the idea sink into his bones. "That sounds doable." A tiny laugh escaped me. "It is." He smiled at that, really smiled. And it was the kind of expression that made the world feel a little steadier beneath my feet. Around us, families began heading toward the parking lot, the noise growing softer as the celebration faded. But neither of us moved. We just stood there, suspended in this delicate moment we weren't ready to let go of. Finally, Marcel spoke again, his voice lower, unsure but brave. "Celine, I'm glad it was you." The words hit softly, like warm rain in the middle of summer. Unexpected, gentle, deep. "I'm glad it was you too," I whispered. We stood there a little longer, saying nothing, letting our silence speak more than words could. It wasn't romantic in the dramatic sense, no sudden confessions or sweeping gestures. It was honest, real, the beginning of something unforced. As we walked toward the school gates side by side, our shoulders brushed, barely, softly, intentionally. And in that tiny touch, I felt the truth settle quietly within me. This wasn't the end of something. It was the start. Not a perfect beginning. Not a mapped-out story. Just two people stepping into the unknown, together. When we reached the parking lot, he paused and looked at me one last time. Eyes steady, warm. "I'll see you tomorrow?" he asked, not as a question of uncertainty, but a promise. "Yeah," I said, smiling, "you will." And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel intimidating or heavy. It felt open. It felt possible. And somehow, it felt like Marcel would be part of it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more real stories to life.